Homelands and Boundaries, a journey of discovering Utah's native peoples. The first known people who lived in Utah were the Paleoindians. They lived here from 13,000 years ago to 9,000 years ago. Artifacts from this time are sparse, but we know they were here because they carved large stone spear points, which they used to hunt bison, deer, and mammoths. They were very mobile and walked vast distances across the land. Paleo-Indians lived during a time of change in the climate, where the last ice age was ending and the climate began warming up. Much of Utah was covered in water or marshlands, making it a great place to live for hunting and gathering food. The people of the Archaic period lived in Utah from 9,000 years ago to about 2,500 years ago. As the Ice Age ended, people began living in different ways than the Paleo-Indians before them. Although they still walked across the land a lot, they began staying in places for longer periods of time. People made baskets to store gathered seeds and nuts, and used grindstones to process those seeds and nuts. They hunted antelope and bighorn sheep and fished using woven nets. The bow and arrow was also introduced in the later part of the Archaic period. Archaeologists can see communication and culture in the Archaic period as people started creating rock imagery and small twig figurines, which have been left behind. We can learn from these artifacts today. The introduction of corn and agriculture caused another cultural change and time period. Fremont people lived from about 2,500 years ago to 750 years ago. Fremont refers to a broader culture in which people lived similar lifestyles, with technologies and foodways that were common all over northern and central Utah. Fremont people are known for their excellent farming skills. They grew corn, beans, and squash, diverting water from streams to irrigate their crops. They complemented their diet of farmed foods through traditional hunting and gathering, and different Fremont groups varied in the amount they would farm, hunt, and gather. Archaeologists see important differences from archaic artifacts and rock imagery. Fremont people developed pottery and built more permanent homes called pit houses. Pit houses were half below the ground, half above. They kept people warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Ancestral PUEBLOAN people lived in Utah during the same time as the Fremont people, 2,700 years ago to 700 years ago. Ancestral PUEBLOAN people lived in the canyon country of southern Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. They were skilled farmers using irrigation to grow corn introduced from Mexico, beans, and squash. They built more permanent homes called pueblos made from stones, clay, wood, and straw. Pueblos were often arranged in settlements, where there were also storage structures for food called granaries and public or religious meetings places like kivas. Many of these structures can still be seen today in the cliffs and canyons of southern Utah and the Four Corners region. Ancestral PUEBLOANs created their own styles of pottery, baskets, clothing, and tools. They even had influences from the south, such as macaw bird feathers, and they also domesticated turkeys, making blankets out of their feathers. While Fremont and ancestral PUEBLOAN peoples lived during the same time period in Utah, they lived very different ecosystems and had different cultures, languages, and ways of living. Archaeologists can see the differences in the tools, buildings, irrigation works, art, and clothing that people left behind. About 750 years ago, there was a big migration of people moving in and out of Utah. Archaeologists are not sure exactly why, but they have some ideas. It's likely that the climate changed and became hotter and drier. This would have made farming much more difficult. Some people probably decided to move away, and others probably decided to stay and adapt to the drier climate. Those who stayed probably combined with new groups who moved into Utah from California and Nevada. Other new people came into this region as well. PUEBLOAN people who lived in New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas today are the descendants of Utah's ancestral PUEBLOANs who moved south. The late prehistoric period began after the migration and integration at the end of the Fremont and ancestral PUEBLOAN periods. The movement of people around the region brought new groups to Utah with a variety of skills. Some hunted and gathered, some farmed, and some used horses, which were a new introduction to North America from Europeans. In this period, we can recognize 5 distinct language groups that live in Utah today: the Shoshone, Goshute, Paiute, Ute, and Navajo peoples. Within these language groups, people lived in small communities that governed themselves. Native peoples lived throughout Utah and developed advanced technologies, foodways, and cultural practices that were adapted to the environments where each community lived. Some groups adopted horses, such as the Ute, Shoshone, and Navajo. Many groups lived a mobile lifestyle based on hunting and seasonal harvesting of plant foods. Some groups continued to farm, such as the Paiute and Navajo. European influences, such as technology, horses, guns, and diseases, caused drastic changes to the Native American ways of life, and Native peoples adapted to and found ways to preserve their communities. The late prehistoric period lasted for about 500 years. Archaeologists end this period in the 1700s, when European settlers started coming into this part of the West. Today, there are 8 federally recognized tribal nations located in Utah. Each one is unique in culture and government. There are also traditionally associated tribes to Utah, such as the Pueblo tribes located in New Mexico and Arizona. It is essential that we look to Native people today to teach us about their cultures and histories. The 8 federally recognized tribal nations of Utah are Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, Confederated Tribes of Goshute, Skull Valley Band of Goshute, Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah, San Juan Southern Paiute Tribe, Ute Indian Tribe of the Uinta and Ouray Reservation, Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, and Navajo Nation. For more on Utah's history, please visit ilovehistory.utah.gov.